Yeah, I'm Luke with Extraction. This is Jeff. Not used to really speaking to younger crowds and stuff, so a little bit nervous, so bear with me. That being said, please, like Ms. Romo encouraged, just ask questions if we're going through something. You guys, your parents or folks, or you guys have had anything that's been on your guys' minds, please feel free to ask it. I'll answer the best of my abilities, and I won't lie to you if I don't know. I'll just tell you I don't know. If it's something I can't really speak to with great length, I'll just explain that as well. We work for Extraction. We're an E&P company, an oil and gas producer. We went IPO last year, pretty new company. Started off private, just some investors and things like that. All of us had a background just from other E&P operators previous to starting Extraction here.
Oil and natural gas. 65% of the energy consumed in the United States comes from oil and natural gas. So as you can see here, we've got a little circle chart here. Shows that oil is used, transportation uses 93% of transportation uses oil, and a very small amount of it uses 3% uses natural gas, and that's your RTD buses. There's been a lot of innovations trying to get vehicles to start using natural gas, because natural gas puts off less emissions than oil and coal. It burns a lot cleaner. So industrial uses about 40% oil and then 43% natural gas. And the other 7% of industrial sites use coal and renewable energy. Residential and commercial buildings, they use a lot of natural gas for heat. Your guys' houses use either propane or natural gas. This school, for instance, a large percentage of buildings use natural gas for heat and other sources. And the other 15% is oil, and then renewable energy, that 8%. Same thing with electric power. Power plants using a lot of coal. There's been a lot of advancements in technology trying to phase that out and go to natural gas and nuclear power, just because the emissions of coal is extremely high.
These are just some more slides, guys, of some of the folks that work with, a pretty young group. This is just some pictures of, we started off with the video here this morning there. Ms. Romo was saying that there hadn't been a whole lot of explanation in length of how we're extracting the actual oil and gas and things like that. So just kind of rudimentarily there, this is the drill string that they were describing in that video that they're initially using to break ground and kind of slide pipe. Like Jeff was talking about, there's a lot of technological advancements here in recent years that give us the ability to decide exactly where our bit and things like that are going, exactly where we're drilling. So we can go left, right, miles out, up, down, in a lot of advancements. Nevertheless, it's large equipment. It's a drilling rig. It's not a frac tower, contrary to popular belief. This is just a picture of a work floor. A couple guys making up some drill string and running in and digging hole. This is an example of a frac fleet. This is who Miss Lizzie works for. This is a fracking operation. Good depiction of it. Each one of these trucks constitutes plus or minus about 2,400 horsepower. They have the ability to pump off 15,000 pounds of pressure. They can move 12 barrels a minute with fresh fluid and 2-inch iron, just depending on what other friction reductions and things like that and chemical additives you're going to utilize to suppress some of the pressures and control them.
The enclosure on those trailers are there just to minimize the sound, because underneath them is a large motor, and they are extremely loud if they are just exposed. And new technologies have been created to isolate those motors and keep the sound down for the residents around the area. And we've also been utilizing the sound walls. If you guys have driven by a oil and gas site, you'll usually see a large wall surrounding it. It's there not because we're not trying to hide anything from anyone. We're not. There's nothing secret going on behind the wall. It's literally there just to keep the sound down, and a lot of the residents around the area see our sites as kind of an eyesore, and they'd rather just have a wall and close it instead of seeing and hearing all the operations going on site.
One other quick thing, just these pools you see in the background there, those are large pools that just constitutes fresh water, majoritively speaking.
Fracking constitutes, it uses a large amount of fresh water, and we'll explain the process here in a little bit when we show you guys how we develop this mixture of fluid. So here's just a couple of pictures of the operations as well. This here in the middle is called the goat head. It sits on top of the well that we are fracturing, and these lines you can see are tying into it. They're coming in from those pump trucks in the previous picture, and that's how that fluid is pumped into the well at relatively high pressures. We're pumping at around 8,000 psi when we're fracking a well. It's kind of hard to see here, but this is a blender right here, and we'll explain that as well. And after the fracking operations, this here is a workover rig. It's similar to a drilling rig, but it's smaller and it's mobile. It's a lot more mobile. It's easier to move. And that's what we'll use once the well is complete to
drill out those plugs.
Drill out the plugs that was explained in that video, and clean out a well and run any production tubing that we decide to run as necessary after the process is finished. And again, there's that rig again. It's just called a workover rig or a service rig. They look really similar to a drilling rig. So it doesn't necessarily mean, if you see a rig out in the field, it don't necessarily mean that someone is drilling there. It's usually because there's an existing well there and it's just being maintained. This is an example of some of our facilities. These are the wells. It's what they look like after they've been completed. They've got automation tied onto them so that they can be monitored and shut in remotely, depending on if there's any complications with the well. They can shut valves as necessary. So these wells will go to these what they call them separators. And let's see, these are some tank batteries here. So this is an aerial view of one of our sites. Each one of these here are separators, and what they'll do is those wells will flow directly to these separators, and then the separator will separate the oil, the water, and the gas that the well produces, and it'll send the oil to these tank batteries. We call that our tank battery facility. And if you can see there, it's surrounded by a barrier in case there is a leak in one of those tank batteries, or if a valve is left open, or any sort of leak. It'll just be contained within this wall so that it can be cleaned up and it won't spread out into the farmer's field or the dirt. Same thing with the water. The separator will send the water over here to these tank batteries. Same thing, that water, those batteries have containment around them as well. And At some point, that water will be hauled off to a disposal well and properly disposed of. And then the natural gas that's produced by the well will just automatically go down, we call it a sales line, and it just goes straight to a facility that will just produce it and then directly send it to our homes and commercial buildings. And that's just a final site there. We just try to keep the minimal footprint, and we try to make it look as nice as possible, choosing colors that kind of blend in with the dirt. So the U.S. Relies on 63% of our total energy demand from oil and gas. And again, 96% of our transportation fuels, and 25% of our electricity. The state of Colorado oil and gas industry has paid $763 million in taxes. That's a pretty big boost to the Colorado economy. In the state of Colorado, the oil and gas industry supports 110,000 jobs, and that's enough people to fill Coors Field Stadium 2 times over. Again, that's a lot of lives and families affected by the oil field, and again contributing to the economy of Colorado. So Colorado is a self-sustaining state.
It's one of the few.
Any energy that we use, we actually produce in state, and then what we produce more than that is exported to other states. So that contributes to 25% less than the national average of the cost of the natural gas and gasoline and stuff that most other states will pay higher rates for. And $1.6 billion of annual revenue comes from the oil and gas industry that benefits schools and police departments, fire departments, roads, parks, bridges of Colorado, and
statistic too.
And many small businesses also rely on the industry.
We'll talk a little bit about this. I mean, it's just kind of another overview or another slide, just with it cut out, so you can kind of see internally. Just got a little pointer thing I'm doing it. So there's just a depiction of the water table, and several of the barriers. Just another depiction of several of the barriers that we put in place down well below water aquifers and things like that we utilize regularly. Just kind of, it's semi to scale, I suppose. That's one of the major producing formations that we tap into in the DJ Basin. Another one is a Codell. That's a good average depth. That's about the true vertical depth on average there for most of what constitutes Colorado, and up through the whole stream there, kind of through the whole Midwest, starting from North Dakota, South Dakota, down through Texas and Wyoming and things like that, right? Kind of just showing the fracture points and the perforations getting into the rock, and some of the casing strings and some of the redundant barriers that we have, even through some of the non-permeable formations. We'll let Lizzie from Liberty here, she is one of our vendors. Major role in
this picture here shows on our fracking sites, you'll see these cranes sticking up in the air. That is what holds up the wireline tools so that they can run into the well with those perforation guns, as was explained before. And they basically have little bullets that shoot out from the tool, and they penetrate through the casing and through the cement, and they create that initial break for us to start fracking. And
They're actual shape charges. You need to have explosives permits, class 3, and all that good stuff.
the whole point of fracking is to try and place this sand in those cracks and extend those cracks, as we'll explain here in just a second. But if you think of a glass of water, the only way that you can pump sand is in a fluid. And if you take a glass of water and just pour sand in it, what do you think is going to happen? It's just going to fall to the bottom. And there's been technical advances to create a fluid solution to help carry that sand so that it can be pumped through equipment and pushed into a well using high pressure. So, Lizzie, take over.
Well, I'm Lizzie. I'm from Southern Colorado originally, and I grew up on a ranch. My parents are actually doctors, and I decided that I'd spend enough time like in the hospitals and doing that when I was younger, so I wanted to do something that would help all of the population, every person, and so I decided to go into the oil field. And I actually went and got my engineering degree from the University of Wyoming, and then started in the oil field about 4.5 years ago. Worked in North Dakota, Wyoming, and now back in Colorado because this is where my family is. So it's been pretty amazing to be able to go to work and then actually come home at night. Because when you're in the oil field, you're usually away from your family for at least 2 weeks to maybe even a month. That's how it's always been. And thanks to fracking, we've been able to work here where we live and come home to our families every day. And so I worked at Liberty for almost a year now, and so I'm going to tell you guys what we do as far as fracking, and that way you have a little more idea of how it works. So we'll go back to the picture of the frack fleet. This is actually a frack job. This is what it looks like. There's no towers, there's no nothing like secretive about it. We start in the back here with water because, like I said in the movie or the video, 99% of what we pump and use in a frack job is water and sand. And that means only less than 1% is chemical. And we're actually going to go over that here in a little bit. I'll show you what kind of chemicals we use in a fracturing job so that we can suspend the sand and actually move the sand from here on surface down to where the oil is. So we start in the back here with water, and these are all water tanks back here. And then from there it goes into, this is called a hydration unit, and it's about 200 barrels, and a barrel is about 42 gallons. So quite a lot of water. And we put a gel. We use guar bean, which is actually just a pea bean that grows over in India and the Middle East. And it literally is just a thickening agent. So it's like taking water and making it more syrupy. That way it can hold the sand in the fluid to carry it down to the well. From there, and that takes about 5 minutes, and then from there, that viscous fluid moves to our blender right here. And blender is literally just like a blender, like when you blend food and smoothies or whatever. It has a tub that's 10 barrels, so it's pretty small compared to the hydration unit. But this is where the sand, it's right here, these are the sand boxes. This is where the sand goes in and the chemicals go in, and that's where the whole water, chemical, and sand mix, and we call that a slurry. From there, it goes into, this is what we call a missile, and the missile feeds fluid, or slurry fluid, to all these pumps. All 12 of these pumps then take that fluid from no pressure at all and pressure it up to whatever we need to crack the rock down in the well. And sometimes that could be 8,000 pounds. So it's quite a bit. Right now the pressure on us is 1. That's what atmospheric pressure is. So the biggest danger we have in fracking are these lines right here. Those are high pressure going into the well, and that's where your high pressure is. And that's the biggest danger that we have being out there if something explodes or starts to leak. And we have all kinds of regulations and protocol to eliminate problems like that, because it will hurt people and it hurts equipment. We don't want to do that and it wastes time. So we have it so that people do not go in here while we are actually pumping, and other safety protocol. And then for sand, these are actually sand boxes. I know you've seen them on the road. They literally are just boxes of sand. And so that way we can easily transport the sand from rail cars, because that's how it usually comes here, because it's coming from around Wisconsin area, and it comes here on the train, and then they put it into these boxes, and these boxes then open on the bottom onto a conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt then feeds straight into the blender tub. That way we eliminate dust and more loud moving sand parts that we used to do. And since we've moved into Colorado, we are very cognizant of the general public, and we want to cut down on any disturbance or annoyance that might be perceived or you might see. So we've gone to these sand boxes to eliminate dust. And this is actually our quiet fleet. Our quiet fleet is so quiet that we could have a conversation right here next to each other, because each one of these is 2,500 horsepower. And could you imagine 2,500 horses making noise at once? That's pretty loud. So with all 12, that's 40,000 horsepower. So we put these boxes on them to eliminate that noise concern. And obviously, like we talked about earlier, the walls around. So that way you guys cannot hear a frac job going on like you used to be able to. And the dust is eliminated. And also another thing we do on frac locations is occasionally there will be a spill of like chemical. We try to eliminate that as much as possible, because if it's on the ground, we can't use it as well, and so we never want anything to be on the ground or spill. But if something does happen, we have containment. So you see all this black right here? We use rubber and plastic containment around the whole location, so that way nothing ever hits the dirt. We never want any type of fluid. Even a water bottle that we drink does not allow to touch the dirt. So everything that can move, any type of fluid, stays on this containment, and we clean it up as soon as it happens. And then we dispose of it where government regulated and where it's supposed to be.
All these pumps run off of diesel, and they have hydraulics, and every now and then it's just human error. Someone will accidentally spill some diesel. There will end up being a hydraulic leak on a truck, and that's just to minimize every possible chemical, because diesel and hydraulic fluid is considered a chemical. We can clean it up and not allow it to get on the dirt.
Yeah, so our number one priority is not allowing any type of fluid to touch the dirt or be able to flow anywhere. So we clean it up immediately. So the video kind of talked a little bit about what it looks like down there. So you can see here's the surface, and then water is usually below 1,000 feet below or higher. So it never usually goes that far. We will drill this surface casing, and it goes below the water table here. And so the casing is actually steel pipe. So we put the steel pipe below the water table, and then we cement it. So there's two barriers right there between the water table and the actual well. And then we put the well casing string, which is the long one right here, and goes all the way down. And that's also steel pipe. And once we set that in place, we actually cement it as well. So by this time we have 2 to 3, 4, 5 layers protecting the surface water from anything that's actually in the well bore itself. And the well bores are usually about 5.5 inches. So it's not very big. It's a pretty small hole considering. And then when we come into frac, that is completely isolated from the rock itself. So that rock is as hard as those counterfalls back there. And here's some pictures here's some fossils, and you can see how hard they actually are. You can pass them around. This is how hard that rock is. It is extremely hard to break. and the oil is inside of it. So like that countertop's black, that's kind of what shale would look like. It'd be the blackness of that, but it's so tight that you actually have to make cracks in the rock for the oil to flow through. And you want the oil to flow to the actual wellbore, which is right here. You don't want it to flow anywhere else because then you're not actually utilizing it. So we fracture it and it makes cracks all the way right in here, right where the oil is. So it's a lot like this wall here. The fractures will be like this brick is the shale. We'll fracture it with all this little in between. That'll be like the fracture technique, kind of how it looks downhole. And then what stops it is like, see over here, the window, nothing can go above that. So that rock is that hard. So as soon as there's not a fracture, it's not gonna move. So there's no water contamination from the fracture itself, because first off, this is around here in Colorado, it's 7,500 feet below surface. Remember, water's 1,000 or above, so you have 6,500 feet between there. These fractures only reach 500 feet at best. So there's never been any case of a fracture contaminating surface water when we're doing it correctly like this, because we're so far below surface.
There's a mile of formations in between the where the oil is at, where we're extracting it from, and the water table. And the formations in between there are even harder than where we're extracting the oil from. So there's just no possible way that any of that pressure can work its way up into the water table. So as long as we have our well isolated using the barriers of the surface casing at the top portion of the well, our water tables will stay clean.
Yep, and then once we frack each one of these, it actually allows for a pathway for the oil to flow from the rock to the wellbore and then back up to us, where we have valves, and they are what we control the pressure with. It's just like a Capri Sun. You know how the Capri Sun is where the oil is, your straw is the well. You put the straw in, you put your thumb on the top, that way nothing comes out. That's our valve. As soon as you open it and squeeze,
Or blowing it,
it starts coming out. So it's pretty much the same type of theory there. That's exactly what's happening when we first have a well that we just fracked.
Let's take a little break there. Anybody have any questions at any point? Anybody, your folks had anything on their mind? Anybody questions about anything?
Go ahead.
When you're going down and then you're going across, how do you, can you visualize it from above, on the ground? How do you know that it's going the way it should?
It's a lot like Bluetooth technology, ma'am. We have things on our bits, and just through some historical practice and things like that, we've got dialed in through some specific tools and motors that we run downhole based on our RPMs and our fluid rates and our weight that we're allowing to go down on our drilling surfaces. We can dictate and manipulate our bits to different directions and degrees. And we pre-spec that, like a seismograph or anything to identify the reservoirs. And then our land department carefully maps that out in accordance with our geology department.
Technology's come a long way, and that's the only reason why we're able to do that, and that's the only reason why it's evolved into this.
What's up, bud?
So down on 392, like kind of by 21, that oil rig that blew up.
Okay, very good question. So
What happened?
that was our lease. Okay, I can talk about it kind of broadly and things like that, and kind of explain what we think happened and what phase that was at.
Should we go over that? Should we go over that after the presentation? Because that's in the final process of.
I don't want to think about it the whole time, though.
Okay.
And wait to get on that. Let's just
All right.
let's just get out of the way. I mean, everybody's kind of getting a little lazy here. guys, we didn't want to come here and just talk at you, you know, so, if you, I don't know, we just didn't want to talk at you, right? We just wanted to treat you guys responsibly, and, I mean, you guys are our future, right? I mean, you guys are the next generation. Not trying to be cliche or weird about things, but that's just reality. When I was in school, I didn't know a lot about the oil and gas industry. I mean, I didn't wake up until, you know, like 9 o'clock and stuff, usually late. Then had to grow up and go to work and stuff, and seeing that the rest of the world, you know, a good portion of it gets up at 4 in the morning, is out there, you know, pumping wells and working and things like that, and they get in really late. So, a lot of people will migrate into the oil and gas industry. A lot of guys, a lot of girls. A lot of the advancements, a lot of the technological advancements, a lot of the environmental protection, regulations, stipulations, everything else is derived from really, really intelligent kids and disgruntled people, you know, people that hate our industry. If you hate it so bad, do something about it, you know.
Even even NASA, we have some vendors that have actually created some tools and patented some tools and made a lot of money because they've invented things using NASA technology and putting it towards drilling.
Absolutely.
And to answer your question there, it wasn't the wells that incident happened on was not during drilling or fracking or anything. All those processes had already been finished. And
Remember the pictures there of the whole facilities?
Yeah.
A little bit ago. Liz, can you click back?
Right here?
This. That's the phase that we were at. We were already in the producing phase. There was one last subsidiary vendor on location that is deemed flowback. They're kind of well testers is another name for them. And like Jeff was talking about, describing there, they just kind of regulate, watch the systems on location because wells are coming back raw to make sure that the separators are functioning properly, things like that. With that being said, just like Jeff was describing, that's when you have a lot of raw, very susceptible to flame and explosion, raw oil getting moved and stored in large volumes, right? As well as gas. There's, I don't know how familiar you guys are with HEL and LEL. It's a higher explosive level and lower explosive level. Depending on barometric pressure and temperature, things like that, it creates a more optimal environment for an explosion, okay? So what we believe happened, we're still investigating it with the ATF, FBI, and things like that, right? Arson engineers, things like that. So we believe that the location got saturated with gas. We believe that
they had equipment where it shouldn't have been. We have areas on a location that could have the possibility of gas in that area. We do everything that we possibly can to eliminate gas on a location. If you guys have driven by and see a flare or a flame coming off of oil and gas site, that's to minimize the chances of an explosion on site. We're burning off that gas. It's reducing emissions, and it's just the best way to control that gas is to burn it off. And we have certain protocols and rules that we have to keep running the equipment, because if there is gas that exists on site, a motor is considered a spark. If that gas starts going into the air intake of that motor, it can cause it to rev up and backfire, throw a spark out the exhaust pipe, and whatever gas is in the air will just explode. And that's what we're thinking might have happened there.
There were several barriers and safety violations that Jeff's describing, and regulations through OSHA and API standard, industry standard, that were violated.
We have monitors that detect gas. We have supervisors that watch and make sure that equipment isn't being placed where it shouldn't.
Monitor.
And those just somehow slipped through the cracks. Something happened to where a spark was created in a place where there was gas, and neither of those things should have happened. So the equipment that was involved in that fire it didn't even involve the facility. It was the vendor that we had out there. They had tanks and they had their own
Oil
separators.
stored, gas stored, they didn't responsibly cycle it down.
It only involved their equipment.
We have rumors that the protected monitors that are alerting folks of dangerous gases were silenced and bypassed. Several of the safety features for our wells. We have remote to kind of elaborate a little bit more on the technological advancements. We have plenty of redundant remote operating valves that I can close in any well from 100 miles away, the other side of the U.S. Unfortunately, in this situation, Jeff and I both arrived on this event, and you know, pretty spooky, guys. Not gonna lie to anything. It's a scary thing when you see a fire looking at you and there's a bunch of explosive stuff, right?
It's a huge learning experience because having an explosion is the absolute worst thing that can happen. We do everything possible to eliminate that from happening. Yet it still happened, so we're doing everything possible to close those loopholes to make sure that it don't and can't happen again.
When we arrived, I mean, the local fire departments and things like that did a great collaborative job of getting together and trying to get it addressed, but the unfamiliarity, just the ignorance to oil and gas facilities, to the characteristics, the chemical reactions and things like that, they had showed up and they thought they were doing the right thing, you know, starting to put water on this fire. Unfortunately, it was oil that was burning, so they were just encouraging the tanks to overrun and the fire and the oil to run down to our wells, which then ultimately did end up catching fire with another leak, and some safety things were bypassed, like I said. So we elected to direct them to put out some of the fires with some of the proper chemical agents, like some of the foam and things like that that you see airports and things utilizing. And
it isn't really a chemical either. It's biodegradable.
It's formaldehyde is what it is.
Use.
I mean, it's environmentally friendly.
They use animal fat and
to suffocate a fire out rather than try and put it with water. We really had to direct the fire department to utilize the water just for a cooling agent because we had to get fire temperatures were increasing in some of our vessels, some of our pop-offs and indicators of nearing explosions were starting to take place. So we just had the fire department put some water on. Elected to leave some of the sources of gas and things to burn. So once again, like Jeff was saying, just like lighting your grill, right? When you turn that on and you mess up and it doesn't light, you gotta wait a little bit and start over so it doesn't blow up in your face. We didn't want them to put the fire out. You know, they were trying to put the fire out. It's like, guys, there's all these other things going on. All that's gonna do is encourage another explosion. Gas is gonna migrate and it's gonna blow everything up again. So we needed to let that continue to burn while we mitigated and responsibly got the whole process shut down.
So the good thing about that is it stayed contained. It didn't spread outside of the location. Luckily, there was not a fatality. One guy did get burned. He had second-degree burns on his face. The worst burns were on his hand. He had third-degree burns on his hand. But he's back at home. He's doing a lot better. And just like I said, it's unacceptable in our industry.
It sounds like we're lucky you guys didn't have a second or third explosion, right? That's what it sounds like. So you were lucky with just one explosion, based on what you're saying.
Yeah, that's accurate, Ms. Rummel. It's
With high
fortunately,
pressure equipment out that was on location and everything, it's,
Yeah.
we had several other barriers in place to mitigate redundant barriers, to
Right.
mitigate for an event that took place. I mean, we always hope and encourage to do everything we can to minimize or eliminate, but when it does take place, we need to be ready for it, right?
yeah, go ahead.
Did the vendor that caused the problem get fined or?
So they're still under investigation, and they're not.
They're definitely being held accountable for it. That OSHA is investigating them
I think so.
So are we, you know, like, so
Yeah.
we're not pushing it off that this was just this vendor's fault. We were not there, we had no ownership under that we owned that location, but it is still our location. We still actively came to this community that we live in and told them we were gonna responsibly produce oil and gas. So, yes, I mean, it's, there's a lot of things that are gonna come in place, a lot of regulations and stipulations and policy that's gonna come in place. There was another thing that Liz and Jeff didn't describe in detail was the barriers there that you guys seen on the pictures are relevant on all of our locations. But we also have, we're putting down something we call stabilized. It's like a gravel equivalent or like a blacktop equivalent that's impermeable and unpenetrable, you know, from any contamination that if the rubber barriers or plastic barriers get burned up in an event that like took place on the Stromberger and location out east of town, there's still another baked-in barrier that, by design, as it heats up, it's designed to get more encapsulated, right? So
An
to protect
example
the
is,
environment.
Luke lives right here in Windsor. I grew up in Erie. I live in Meade. Everyone that works at extraction lives in Colorado. You know, we're drilling around our own homes. We, the employees, wouldn't do anything that
It's
that
gonna
we would
compromise our
feel
kids or future
affect,
generations, our houses.
Yeah, because the residents are just as, we are residents ourselves too. So, everything we do,
We need to be held accountable for.
yeah,
As our families.
we think about ourselves about too. So we don't do anything that we feel like is gonna affect our community and our environment in a bad way. And if it does, if there is something that comes up, it's brought up. It's
We address it.
admitted,
We don't have-
it's addressed.
There was a lot of, okay, so with the technological advances that we're talking about, right, a lot of this has come to fruition in the last 5-10 years. A lot of these kids that play video games and stuff, they go out, they can run circles around on these drone rigs, everything is automated. These guys are making connections with video controllers and stuff, I can't do that, you know. I can give the engineering advice and everything like that, these kids are running circles around, and then they'll come out and they'll be like, well, why can't we just do this? It's like, I don't know, let's try it, you know, I mean, run the math, run the physics and the engineering, but it's just question everything, you know, just the breakthrough in the sheer hatred for us or the sheer love and desire, we get benefits and repercussions for both and deal with them accordingly. You ready to mix, Liz? We got about 35 minutes left.
So, just something I wanted to go over real quick is, something that's asked a lot too, like, why Weld County? Why are we drilling around homes and, you know, Greeley, a city and all that? And, I don't know if you could explain a lot better than me, but.
So, this whole area millions of years ago was at the bottom of the ocean. And so, as the animals died and fell to the bottom, animal life, everything is decayed and died towards the bottom of the ocean. And then, all that organic matter was then covered up. Obviously, it's not a sea anymore. So it's been covered up with millions of years of dirt, sandstone, shale, and that shale was the bottom of the ocean. That's why it's so hard. And then the whole entire area from Canada all the way to Texas has just been covered with layers and layers of rock and dirt and other matter. And so right now, right here in this area, we have what is called the Niobrara Shale, and it's easily accessible for fracking and drilling right now. And so that's why right here in this area, we're able to get oil. There's oil in Texas as well, and North Dakota, and in Wyoming, but right here in Weld County and a little bit farther south in Adams County, Larimer County, this area is just, the shale is very rich in light oil, which is very easy to refine. And so that's why we're here actually getting oil and gas from right in this area, because it's easy to get to and produce, and it's high quality crude oil and natural gas. So there's a lot of natural gas over in western Colorado as well. And then so someday maybe we'll be able to get to that. And then North Dakota has a lot of really good crude oil, and so does Texas. But eastern Colorado is not so much. It's all in this area. It just concentrates towards where the organic matter back millions of years ago actually gathered and decayed.
That organic
So that's
matter,
why.
after it gets layers and layers on top of it, those layers create more pressure, and then the further you go down below the surface, the hotter it gets. So it gets to that perfect depth where it's got so much pressure and so much heat, it just turns that organic matter into oil and gas.
Most of it's vegetation and small plankton-like materials and things. We're not drilling down and tapping into a stegosaurus or anything like that, you know.
There's some areas that produce just gas, and there's other areas that produce just oil. And this area around here produces both. We get gas and oil out of our wells, and it actually makes it a lot easier to flow back the well, because you can utilize the gas to push up the oil from the bottom of the well, just like these two were describing with the Capri Sun bottle. You just basically push air into your bottle and it'll just spray back up in your
Charging up
face.
your reservoir.
It's a lot like a well.
Lizzie's gonna mix up some stuff there. It's same products as what we use on a fracking location, 2 hydraulically stimulator wells. And then we've also purchased some products from the local grocery store and are gonna recreate the same process.
So yeah, we'll show you guys what actually goes into the frac fluid, because I know everybody is a big concern. Like we said, 99% is water and sand. So here's the sand. Water is like fresh water. That usually comes like a lake type of water. It hasn't been treated or anything. And so you guys can come back here and watch. I have 2 examples. I'm not gonna mix any sand in here just because it's not good on my blender, but and it takes about 3 to 5 minutes to hydrate. So that's the guar gum. This is the exact same stuff, but this is from a frac location. So that way I can show you how they both work.
But during the frac, they have what's called a blender on location that does the exact same thing that these ones are doing. Right
Yep.
on the table. It's just a much larger, higher volume piece of equipment.
Yep, so just watch it, make sure it gets the viscosity, because the viscosity is what allows it to suspend the sand. And then, so the pH of water is a 7. And so we use a borate to actually make what we call a crosslink. And so crosslink, you'll see it here in a minute when I get it back all together, but crosslink is what holds the fluid together and holds the sand in the fluid so it doesn't fall. But first, for that borate, we have to increase the pH so the borate can bond to it. So I use a buffer. Take it up to about a 9. You see how it turns yellow? So that's from frac location. From Whole Foods, I'm just using this baking soda cream cleaner. Like, it's pretty much the same thing. You can buy this. This is for cleaning household products. So I have that here. Use it here. See how it turns it yellow as well? That way you know that it's actually increasing pH. And then I use a pH probe to see what my pH is, and it should be about a 9. And it is. It looks good. So I keep it blending because that's the whole point of the blender. Just like when you're making smoothies, you don't want it to not be smoothing it up. So the last thing we put in is actually a crosslink, which is the borate chemical we use, or the chemical ion. So I put it in this one.
This is like what the trucks are fixing on site, right?
Yep, this is exactly what.
And that's all automated on site.
Yes, we have little pumps that pump. So that one's together. So for this one, just used Visine. Visine eye drops. It's pretty much exactly the same thing. So we use that to create this fluid. And see how it's not even coming out? That's because it's so cross-linked. So that's what you want, because that way it actually gets this sand down to the wellbore instead of just having it fall out.
There's a little sample ball that you guys can pass around, kind of gives a depiction of just the sand sitting there, and if you shake it up, like Lizzie's describing, it just has that suspension characteristics that'll hold the sand in suspension.
Yeah, after an amount of time, it kind of loses its viscosity, but it still kind of shows you that. So imagine if you blended sand in there as well, it would keep it
So see how it's still?
So that's the whole point of doing this, is just to be able to blend that sand in this and not just have it fall to the bottom.
So see how it holds together like that? That's what you want. And that's what we call crosslink. And that's what we use to pump the water and pump the sand, and then we use the water as the carrying fluid to haul sand down to hold the fractures open. So you guys can pass that around, look at it, and then this is the crosslink that we use on location. And see how it's so jelly, and it holds sand just right. So you guys can pass that around too. So that's exactly the same. It's exactly the same thing.
You guys can touch it, just make sure you wash your hands after you do it.
Yeah, don't eat it. Visine is not a good thing to eat. So our chemicals are safe. We aren't using anything that's going to harm anybody. Like I said, you can find all this obviously at the store. That's where we went to Whole Foods and got it. And so, do you guys have any questions?
So in a little bit, she's gonna add some breaker and put it back down natural. And we wanted to cross-link and carry all the way down to the perforations right before we get into the rock. And then we wanted to break that down and finish it for us.
So on site, you don't want this to stay this thick once you put it down into the well. So they add something else to it to help it eventually come back into a liquid form.
For your urology kickers, just turn that more like water.
Yep. And so then we add what we call a breaker, because it'll actually break the fluid back down. It's heat activated, so that way once it gets into the formation and starts to warm up, because the rock down in the Earth's core or the crust is hotter than here on surface. So once it reaches about 180 degrees, it'll start breaking down the fluid so that the sand stays there in the fractures. And see, this is already falling apart. And I just added vinegar. Our breaker's pretty much vinegar. So it was pretty clumpy like that, like crosslink is supposed to be. And then with the breaker, it breaks it back down apart, so that way when we're done with the fracture, with the frac job, and it's time to flow back the well, we can get all the fluid back and start to produce oil and gas. So, yep, just normal household chemicals, and so nothing dangerous, nothing toxic that we use.
So we don't buy all of our ingredients from Whole Foods because it's all that stuff's got other ingredients that we don't.
Sorry,
It's not
you're fine. You guys
necessary
would be
to-
paying $15 a gallon of
to
gas.
mix it, and
Mhm.
it's expensive. We just buy the products that we need to create this blend, and that's the cheapest way to perform the job.
Yep. So all these chemicals we can buy in bulk. And because we do so many frac jobs, we need bulk chemicals because it's more economical. And then we can work cheaper, produce the oil cheaper, and then that way it's cheaper at the gas station.
So then when frac finishes up and they move off the location, we put the wells on what we call flowback, and we start, these wells are under an extreme amount of pressure because they've been charged up by this fracking process, and it's also released the pressure that's within this formation where the oil and gas exists. So all we do is basically open up a valve, and we allow the well to flow back, and we start getting back the water that we used to frack the well, and then eventually we start getting gas, oil, and we start getting the water that was already existing in the formation, because it's not only gas and oil that's in these rock formations. There's existing water in there as well, and it's what we call it production water, and we treat it the same as our frac fluid that we use as well. So that production water that comes out of the well is actually really salty because that formation is full of salt. And so the best way that we find right now is to use disposal wells to dispose of that water that we produce out of these wells. The best, most natural filter that exists is planet Earth. So there's wells that exist that they drill down deeper than the formations that we get the oil and gas from. They inject this water down into the ground, and eventually it comes back up somewhere years down the road, and it'll be cleaner than any spring water, basically.
They're treating it on the fly as they're injecting it in these disposal wells, just like Lizzie is demonstrating here and things like that.
Yeah, they don't just allow any fluid to be injected into a disposal well. If it's containing any sort of chemical or anything that's concerning, they'll send it somewhere else to be treated before they put it back into the ground.
You guys have any questions? Go for it.
The old oil pumps you see out like if you go out that way for like a long time, you got those old oil rigs that just like pump that.
Pump jacks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are, that's a pony rod right there to that gentleman's left. That's exactly what's going up and down. It works pretty much like a syringe concept. You have what they call a downhole pump down there, and it's got some check valves. Those pony rods move up and down inside of production tubing, and it just starts generating hydraulic, lift on your oil and everything else, and pumping it up the surface.
This is just a small one. They're usually 25 feet in length, and they all screw into each other, and they'll be run all the way to the bottom of the well to a pump. And as you move them up and down, that pump works to push the oil up, and that usually becomes the case after some wells. After so many years, the pressures will go down, and it won't have enough power to push the oil up by itself.
So those are true oil wells, right? Like Jeff was describing, we utilize a lot of the natural gas and the natural characteristics that we can benefit off of reference and byproduct. And once they're treated down, the gas is depleted, it's still producing some oil, so they'll use a mechanical pump or something like that, you know,
So when he was talking about those things, why are they like individually? You have to screw them on individually. Why aren't they just one whole rod?
Well, there's several reasons, right? They do have what you're describing is called continuous rod. It basically boils down to economics again. You know, what's cheaper and what's just easy to cast, manufacture in large bulk and volume versus transportation concerns and things like that. You know, like Jeff said, these are on average a good mile down to our formations and things. So to try to transport, you know, a mile worth of continuous rod that you don't want to bend just isn't realistic.
Yeah, we're talking about 1.5 miles of this all put together, so trying to transport something like that in one piece.
An application too, you know, it's a little more difficult. A guy, you know, can pick up a rod here and make it up, run it in, to where a continuous rod, you need, you know, pretty related hydraulic machinery to assist.
And another thing is, so that these will break sometimes, and they'll get corroded, and there's all sorts of different things. So if there's a well that needs to be maintenance, we can pull these out and only fix the portion that went bad instead of replacing the entire thing.
Have any of you guys ever heard of sour gas? Have you guys talked about that at all?
We had a refinery guy that talked about sweet crude and sour crude, but that's as much as we talked about.
So, being that it's chemistry, I mean, I don't want to get into it too much, but sour gas is, it's a spore that generates they call it sour gas because it smells like rotten eggs. It is incredibly poisonous. It's, some people call it cellar gas, swamp gas. The characteristics of it lays low, you know, so it's contradictory to fire and smoke and things like that. It wants to go to the ground. Perfect example is in some southern regions and things like that, you hear of these wives' tales of a little girl that went out looking for her kitten and a witch killed her or something, you know, she got unfortunately found deceased the next day or what have you, you know. More commonly, the reality of it is that she went out looking for her kitten or something like that, got into a low zone, a valley, around a swamp where some H2S is generated, she inhaled it and expired, you know. It can get generated a lot around here out east, in the cellars. Some people have storm shelters, things like that. They store food. It's a spore that gets into the water and it gets generated. It gets incubated through heat and things like that. It's just one of the componentry that goes into it. So we're constantly treating wells with delicide and bleach and other breakers and things to mitigate these spores that get developed into the wells. We have a lot of related filtration systems, good schedules on cross-contamination things. We don't want to encourage it or spread it even more. And then, I guess the last big thing is, guys, is what I started to talk about is most of the advancements have come as of recent. There was a lot of malpractice performed in the past historically, right? Back in the 1950s, we didn't have satellites, we didn't have cell phones, everybody was doing things with pen and paper or pencil and paper, you know, maybe chalk, I don't know, right? So these guys were drilling wells any way they could. After the well was expired or they had gotten whatever economical production out of the reservoirs and the well that they could, it was nothing but a burden. You know, they were still held accountable, so they had to get rid of it.
Yeah, and let me tell you, it's awesome.
And so where did you go to school?
Oil and petroleum, stuff like that. Yeah, mostly like what the rigs do and how it's effective and keeps the, you know, nature safe. It's probably like a snail. That's an arthropod. I don't know what this is. I think it's like a shell or maybe something. That's